Om. Om. Sahana vavatu, Sahanau bhunaktu, Sahaviryam karavavahai, Tejasvinavadhitamastu, Ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. We shall chant verses 20 till the end. Na prahishyet priyam prapya, no dvijet prapya cha priyam, sthira buddhira sammudhaha, brahmavid brahma nisthitaha, bahya sparsheshvasaktatma, vindatyatmani yat sukham. Sabhrahma yoga yuktatma sukhamakshayamashnute yehi samsparshaja bhogaha dukkayonaya evate adhyantavantah kaunteya nate shuramate buddhaha Shaknoti haiva yah sodhum praksharira vimokshanat kamakrodhodbhavam vegam sayukta sasukhi naraha yonta sukhontararamaha tathantarjyotireva Sayogi Brahma Nirvanam Brahma Bhutodhigacchati Labhante Brahma Nirvanam Rishaya Kshina Kalmashaha Chinnadvaidhayatatmanaha Sarvabhuta Hiterataha Kamakrodhaviyuktanam Yatinam yatachetasam Abhito Brahma Nirvanam Vartate viditatmanam Sparshan Krutva Bahirbahyan Chakshuschaivantare Bhruvoho Pranapanau samau krutva nasabhyantaracharinaau yatendriyamano buddhihi munirmokshaparayanah vigatechabhayakrodhaha yah sada mukta yeva saha Bhoktaram yajñatapasam sarvalokamaheshwaram suhrudam sarvabhutanam jnatvanam shanti mruchati. Hari Om, everyone. Namaskaram. The last we did was the 19th verse. Even here, the birth is overcome by those whose mind rests in evenness. Brahman is indeed spotless and equal. Nirdosham samam. Tasmat, therefore, they are established in Brahman. Even here, birth is overcome. Birth and death, as we have learned, is only change. Anything that changes causes mental agitations. You lose your sense of equanimity. So by saying birth is overcome means one who has overcome the sorrow and suffering that the world and the change inflicts on us. He is overcome by those whose mind rests in evenness. Yesham samye sthitam manaha. Mind is in evenness. Now, how do you gain that quality of even-mindedness? He says, because of the attribute or the qualities of Brahman. Brahman is indeed spotless and even-minded, equal. So when you're identifying with the self, one indeed becomes spotless. No dirt, no imperfections. And he is equal, samatvam, even-minded. We did this last week. Now, the verses 20 to 29, as I did mention, is a concluding section of the text where he's going to talk about how renunciation precedes meditation and realization. So even before you get into the practice of meditation, one is required to get established in the quality of renunciation. So you will get that message through the set of the next 10 verses, which concludes the text with that, with the set. All right, so let's chant verse 20. Na prahrushyet priyam prapya, no dvijet prapya cha priyam, sthira buddhira sammudhaha, brahmavid brahma nisthitaha. Na prahrushyet priyam prapya, no dvijet prapya cha priyam, sthira buddhira sammudhaha, brahmavid brahma nisthitaha. Now here he says, with steady intellect. With the steady intellect established in Brahman, the undiluted knower of Brahman neither rejoices on obtaining what is pleasant, nor grieves on obtaining what is unpleasant. Sthira buddhi. Sthira buddhi means, sthiraha means stable, steady. Buddhi is the intellect. With intellect established in Brahman, sthitihi. Sthira buddhi, sthitihi. With the steady intellect established in Brahman, the undiluted knower of Brahman neither rejoices on obtaining what is pleasant. Priyam is pleasant. Apriyam. Whenever they use the word which is the opposite. Apriyam means unpleasant, nor grieves on obtaining what is unpleasant. Prahirshet priyam prapya, no dvijet prapya, Chap priyam. So this verse is talking about how a spiritually established seeker gets himself into that position of neutrality. You establish a neutral stance with reference to the external conditions or the happenings. How you experience or gain a certain amount of independency of the world. The undiluted knower of Brahman. So only when you gain the knowledge or the experience, Brahmavit, the knower of Brahman. The knower of Brahman, again here not in terms of theoretical, here in terms of a becoming. So when you become one with Brahman, and that becoming is always relative and absolute. So to the extent you are established in Brahman, again, quality control. Now, these are all the quality controls you will need before you get into meditation. In fact, as a thumb rule, throughout the scriptures, even before they advocate meditation, they talk about the necessary preparation or the adequate qualification required so that you don't do any damage to an ill-prepared mind. So the only thing we need to keep in mind is when the mind is not prepared, and when you push into the practice of meditation, it not only is difficult to control the mind, rather it does damage to the mind. So you should slide into meditation. The mind should slip into meditation. And when you ensure these qualities are there, it becomes very easy for you to achieve that end of controlling the mind or keeping the mind in a meditative state. So what are the qualifications? Now this is directly proportionate to your establishment in Brahman. So one who is established Brahmavit, who is the knower of Brahman, what happens to him? He says he is balanced in priyam and apriyam. He doesn't rejoice in what is obtaining what is pleasant, nor grieves on what is unpleasant. Now, what is our experience? Our experiences are, we are naturally elated and naturally dejected. So we are subjected through the ups and downs of life. Now that we know to what extent we are subjected to the undulations, and to the extent you are subjected, to that extent you are influenced by the world, isn't it? So the world of opposites, the world of good and bad, the world of dvandvas influences us. But a person who is established in Brahman, he says he is not affected. Affected by what? At the physical level. As I said, from external perspectives, you're not affected by either heat or cold. At the physical level, you're not affected with love or hatred. You're not affected by honor or dishonor. So the external world doesn't affect you. Now, how is it that you're able to maintain this samatvam? From where did you gain this quality of samatvam where you're not affected by the world? Where does one gain it from? He says, you gain this quality because of your establishment in Brahman. The nature of Brahman is, it is independent of the world. When you develop an identification with something, the law of life is you become it. When you become the law of identification, you are subjected to the laws of identification. So whatever happens to the object of identification happens to you. Isn't it? That is the law of attachment. If you identify with the body, whatever happens to the body happens to you. Whether heat or cold, health or ill health, it affects you. When you identify with the mind, when emotions are pleasant, you rejoice. When the emotions are unpleasant, you are dejected. The third, honor and dishonor. Because of identification with the body, mind, and intellect, the world influences this body, mind, intellect. You identify it, you become it, you suffer the consequences. Now, at the absolute level, it doesn't affect at all, where you gain a spirit of total independency of the world. What is known as a capacity to be truly self-sufficient. Now, these are the qualities, to be frank with you, these are the qualities you can actually use to measure your own self. How far you have progressed and are you progressing? So they will help you to self-evaluate whether you are spiritually evolving. Now, in spite of our best efforts, what happens is there are moments where you get affected by the world, isn't it? In spite of our best efforts, you could be best prepared to what the life can throw at you, but still sometimes the world catches you by surprise, isn't it? And you're affected. Now, when you are affected, you could be either affected by joy or affected by sorrow. In fact, to be elated also is an affectation. Excitement also, to be extremely happy also is not your natural state. Just like being dejected also is not a natural state. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about a medium, a middle path, isn't it? A neutrality, where you're not affected by joy or affected by sorrow. Now, when one is affected, what should be the immediate course of measure? See, ideally, you should not be affected, and that's a measure of your own spiritual establishment. But yet, when one is affected, what should be the measure we have in our mind? How do we deal with it whenever it comes to it? Whenever we are subjected to it? Gayatri Ma is saying, even this shall pass away. So when you are affected by it, what do you say? You say, this shall pass away? Absolutely. It is not the permanent. It's temporary. Yes. In the course of days experiences, you are either in joy or in sorrow, isn't it? How many actions, how many times are you in between the either? You're not in the extremities. How many experiences can you count yourself have been in neutral? That doesn't mean you don't feel at all, please. No, neutrality doesn't mean you don't feel. You do feel the joy, but you're not affected by joy. You feel the sorrow, you're not affected by sorrow. That is what we're talking about. I hope you can conceive that state. You feel it. Not to feel is like a piece of wood or stone. No, you feel the emotion, and yet you're not tossed by it. You're not overwhelmed by it. You're not influenced by it. You're not swept away by it. You have a sense of your balance and composure. So there is that feeling, but no influenciation. You're not influenced by it. So what all of us need to do is quickly, whenever a ship is sinking, or when not even sinking, when water gets into the ship, one of the first things, what do they try to do? Not that I am a professional in that, I'm just giving a wild guess, so I could be totally wrong. I stand to be corrected. Gayatri Ma, if you can empty the water, well and good. But water is seeping into the ship. What do you try to do? Reduce the weight. See, I remember when I watched that. Are you all able to hear me? All clear? Fine. Okay. How many of you all watched that movie Titanic? You watched it. Okay. Now, what do you notice that first scene when the captain comes with the main people, who designed the ship, and the vice captain, all of them gather when they know that there was a collision with the iceberg. When they stall the ship and they take the stock, what has happened? What's the first thing they try to do? I'm just thinking because that may be the most logical thing to do. Now, at least you go by the movie, you'll get the answer. So my knowledge is only with reference to the movie. No, I know quite a few have raised. Who has right answer? Annapurnama. Don't tell me I have to watch the movie again.
Hari Om Guruji.
Hari Om.
When water, maybe with reference to same Titanic, first they alert the people as to the danger, impediment danger, and then they get the lifeboats and get them ready and try to save people by putting them into the lifeboats.
See, you must understand all what you said is right, but I will draw a parallel of that with reference to our lives. I'm going to draw a parallel with reference example to our experiences. I said in the course of our
so when
day,
we are when we are in real life experience, like if we are too much elated or too dejected with some experiences, then we should evaluate ourselves at what levels of worldly attachments we are. Like you said, we should feel, but not by jolted by that, and we should try to take a balanced view of that. Like yes, due to maybe we have to go through this due to some reason, and we'll overcome this, and without any attachment to that particular event or loss or gain, then we should move ahead.
Okay. Very rightfully said. Yes, you're not wrong at all. Not wrong at all. In fact, in essence, what you are...
Like if we are affected or we...
Yeah, go ahead, Ma.
Yes, and try to improve ourselves with more knowledge, with the guidance of Guru.
Yeah. See, going back again to the example of that situation where there is that moment where water is seeping into the ship. In fact, if I recall well, the first thing they tried to do is they contain the water to those chambers alone. They'll seal the doors so that the water doesn't spread into the, just because 3-4 lower chambers or 5 chambers of that huge ship, the water has come in, that doesn't mean the entire ship will sink. So instantly they try
Very
to,
true, Guruji. I
they try
missed
to
that. That's why.
contain those zones, isn't it? So if they don't contain it,
Thank you, Guruji.
yeah. Even the same principle applies to, it could be a fire in a building, a particular floor is a fire, or an apartment there's a fire. Just because there is a fire in a building, the fire department, apart from rescuing, they'll try to contain the fire to that particular unit alone. They will not try to, they'll ensure it doesn't spread to the rest of the floor, rest of the apartment, and gutter the whole building down. Isn't it? That is the immediate thing where you start getting a control over that situation. Now, many a times what would happen is, if you have not got a control over that situation or that emotion, or contain that frustration, or don't get carried away with that emotion to that experience, it will start spreading into the rest of their activities and it destroys it. So it is not the question of being affected. If you're being affected, ideally not to be affected. And that depends on how strong the intellect is. If that intellect loses that moment of alertness, at least the intellect should wake up to the extent after that to contain it. And if you don't contain it, then it starts spreading and destroys it. So at least we all should remember, I'm just going by this fundamental principle. We are often told that it is not wrong to fall or fail. But when you fall like a ping pong ball, not like a lead plate. Not like a slab of metal. A metal slab falls and it stays put there. Nah, fall is inevitable because we have not reached perfection. But when you fall, you rise as quickly as you fall. Isn't it? So that capacity to spring back to your normal self, how quickly you can come back to your normal self so that you can carry on. So contain that agitation, frustration to that realm and be able to contain it, move on. And perhaps you're able to salvage yourself. You're not defined. In fact, many a time people commit extreme acts of self-punishment. They commit suicide. Why is it? Why does one end up committing a suicide? Is because their life shrinks to that moment alone. It is that moment, and that moment emotion overwhelms them and they can't contain it, and that's it. It just destroys them. So if you can contain that emotion, you will have a larger success in getting out of it. Another important point to remember is it is easier to handle negative than positive. Whenever we talk of these fluctuations, it's easier to handle sorrow than joy. You're not philosophical in your moments of your inspiration. You're not philosophical in moments of your ecstasy. You're not philosophical. You don't say even this will pass away when you're in the best moments of your life. Enna Gayatri Ma, what happens to your philosophy? Even this will pass away. Are you saying when you're in the pink of your health, when everything is fine with you, are you able to tell yourself even this will pass away?
No, we are normal. We think that everything is going on fine. That's all.
Which is which is exactly what we are trying to say. Isn't it? It is difficult to maintain that objectivity when everything is going your way. Very true, isn't it? And the other side of it is round the corner. The opposite of it can be anywhere around the corner, isn't it? And the moment that comes, maybe you'll turn philosophical then soon, but it's difficult to handle success than failure. It is difficult to handle praise than censure. It's difficult to handle success than failure. It's very, very important to understand this. So the real test of your objectivity is in those moments, not in moments of
Joy.
Moments of sorrow. You don't measure yourself in the moments of sorrow. You measure yourself in moments of
Joy.
joy. You know, everybody experience as they say, anything that goes up has to come down, no? So the question is, are you prepared for the fall? You may have name, fame, following, success, people, everything you may have. You may have the love and compassion. You may have everything coming your way. But are you prepared for it when nothing is guaranteed? And when that stops, are you prepared for that? And that capacity to be preparedness is being self-reliant and self-sufficient. You know, there was a torrential flow, and suddenly a guy realized that he might be swept away by the flow of the water. So he quickly climbs onto a tree. And in that precarious, in fact, in that rush, he climbs onto a branch which is very weak. So he is hanging on to that branch very dearly. The branch might break, and the branch breaks, he's finished. He will fall into that flow and he'll swept away. More so, he doesn't even know swimming. So his life pings onto that branch. And as he's holding on to it, a bird comes and gets seated on the neighboring branch of the same tree. So both of them holding onto the branch. The bird and this man. Now, with reference to the bird, the branch breaks. The bird has got the wings of self-sufficiency. Now, this guy, the bird, this guy, the branch breaks, he breaks. So you got to learn to develop that wings of self-sufficiency so that you can depend on yourself, that self-reliance. And where do you get that from? The fact that you are established in Brahman. And in order to get established in Brahman, what do you need to do? In order to get the rewards of getting established in Brahman, what do you need to do? Inna Hariji, what does one need to do?
Sadhana through karma yoga, bhakti yoga, and jnana yoga.
Sadhana.
Sadhana and sadhana alone, with the guidance of Guru.
Correct. In other sense, you need to invest into the reality. You need to invest in the Brahman. Yeah. The moment you invest your time and resources and energy into the attainment of Brahman, you are indeed benefited by this, where you remain unaffected by the fluctuations of the world. So you need to invest. The more you investments in, the more capital you pay, the more rewards you get, isn't it? Now, what capital you are paying in Brahman? Oh, my financial consultant never told me this, that there's investment in Brahman also, sir. Inna Rajima, has your financial consultant told you that there's something called investment in Brahman? Yes, ma.
My guru has taught me that, Guruji.
Yeah. I know you're going to say that. So, in fact, this knowledge is a preparation to life. If we don't realize this, if we have not done this, in times and moments of requirement, we will find we are short of that wisdom. We'll not be able to deal with what life puts us through. And experience has taught us this, isn't it? So one has to invest, as Tinkema says, you have to invest in, rightly so, into your own, through your own study and reflection. That sadhana you have to do. Sitaramji is rightly quoting that famous doha from Sant Kabir. We have chanted it before as well. It's very famous. Sitaramji, can you sing for us?
It goes like this. दुख में सुमिरन सब करे, सुख में करे न कोई, जो सुख में सुमिरन करे तो दुख काहे को होए.
Correct. So simple and yet so profound, isn't it?
Very profound.
Very, very profound. So spirituality begins when you least require it. Just like insurance, you start preparing for insurance when you don't need it at all, isn't it? That's a thought process one should have. All right. He's only talking from an absolute angle now. We are only trying to talk it from a relative standpoint as well. Okay. Right. So let's move on. Verse 21. Bahyasparsheshvasaktatma vindatyatmani yat sukham sabbrahma yoga yuktatma sukhamakshayamashnuте. Bahyasparsheshvasaktatma vindatyatmani yat sukham sabbrahma yoga yuktatma sukhamakshayamashnuте. Unattached to external contacts, one finds happiness in the self. Uniting oneself to Brahman by yoga, he attains eternal bliss. Unattached to external contacts. Bahyasparshe asaktatma. Asaktaha. Saktaha is attachment. Asaktaha, a life of non-attachment or detachment. So unattachment to external contacts, one finds happiness in the self. In fact, something we have learned it time and again, synonymous for attachment is sorrow and suffering. Remember this. Wherever there is attachment, there is bound to be sorrow and suffering. Wherever that there is spirit of detachment, there is joy or happiness. And attachment and detachment, time and again I've said, time and again we will repeat, because we have nothing else to say. Don't expect us to say anything else. So other Shastras saying, and I have to repeat what the great masters have said. Whenever we talk of attachment, detachment, what is it that you should understand? What is the first and the most important thing you need to understand whenever the Shastras talk about attachment and detachment? Perfect. Tinkema, you're very right. Whenever we speak of attachment and detachment, it is an attitude, not a physical state. It is not a physical practice. It is not a physical position. It is a mental quality of your relationship with things and beings. So the moment you are attached to things and beings, you will find yourself in sorrow and suffering. So the moment you are extroverted, you get attached, you will suffer. The moment you're introverted, you turn inward towards the self, you practice the quality of detachment, you will find yourself happiness. One finds the happiness that is in the self. Now, another point he's saying is that there is no happiness in the external world, the happiness is within. Two things. First is you develop attachment, there is sorrow. Detachment, there is joy. That's the first point. The second point he's saying is there is no happiness in the external world. The happiness is within. So if you start moving from the outer world to the inner self, now I'm expanding on the point that there is no happiness in the external objects of the world. The only happiness is in the self. So based on this, if you expand the idea, what do you conclude? What you can clarify or experience is the more you move from the outward to inward, the happiness keeps gradually increasing, which means physical joy is better than material possessions. Physical joy is superior to material joy. Emotional joy is superior to physical and material. Intellectual is superior to mental, physical, material. And spiritual is superior to intellectual, mental, physical, and material. It's just the order of hierarchy. So as you go inward, the happiness quotient increases. And when one who has not gone inward, what is the expression of it, of a person who has not gone inward, who has not discovered the inner joy? Subramanian Garu, a person who has not gone inward, what is the...
Gets tossed around like that, like a boat in the stormy seas, doesn't have his own, yeah. So gets tossed around in the stormy seas, doesn't get, this thing of the rudder, he'll just like that, because what should I say, prone to be affected by whatever is happening. He is not is not able to get that balance.
Subramanian Garu, the concept of being affected was in the previous verse. Right? Now here, we are asking the happiness as you go inward increases.
Yes.
As you go outward, it decreases.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Now, the question I'm asking is, one who has not gone inward, one who has not discovered the real happiness which is within, what is the consequence of not discovering that happiness within?
Sorrow. He'll always be at the mercy of whatever is happening, the people who are giving him sorrow and all that. He wouldn't be able to experience that antasukham. He doesn't do that. That's why he's affected by the pairs of opposites and all these things. That balance is lacking. And the result is either extreme joy or extreme sorrow and all that. Either way, that's not right.
You're still going back to the previous concept. I understand. That's fair. What you're saying is right. Very right. Okay. Right. Okay. Let's hear from Hariji. Can't hear you, sir.
Yeah. He will be always looking to the external world because he still has not to within. He will be always towards externally.
So
Can you hear me, Guruji?
yes, we can hear you. So if I gather what you're saying, that one who has not looked within and not discovered that joy or happiness which is within, such people will only be drawn to the external charms, the external world, and
Yeah.
they will only develop an attachment to the world,
Yeah.
the external. That's what I wanted to get Subramanian Garu. So one who has not discovered within the joy, he will pursue, he will become extroverted, he'll remain extroverted, and he'll develop an attachment to the world. And the grossness of your attachment defines the grossness of a person.
Yeah.
If you're just running behind material wealth, the grossest is people who run behind material wealth. Who are just counting their riches on the materiality they possess.
They will be always in the terrestrial realm.
Yeah. No, we're not even talking of terrestrial realm. We're talking about, even in the terrestrial, we're talking about different realms. As I've said, material, physical, emotional, intellectual, spiritual. So they are these from the grossest
level
to the subtlest. Yeah. So from the gross to subtle. So
yeah.
By the grossness of a person, you know how non-spiritual one is. So if you are attached to the material world, you are the grossest. And if you are attached to wealth, every part of wealth is painful. What are the various transactions of wealth? Shivaji, what are the various transactions you would have with wealth?
You want to get more and more.
All right.
Little more, get more.
Now, what are the various transactions which cause great sorrow and suffering, sir?
Again, it's you hold on to it. As you get more and more, you hold on to it. You want to hold on to it. It doesn't.
You hold on to it.
It reminds that story, you know.
Sir.
Somebody was told that the distance you cover is what is going to be your extent of your estate. So the man ended up walking till he died. So he kept on walking for days, and that's what it does.
Right. See, what I was rightly saying, Shivaji, what I'm getting at is the various transactions of wealth is acquisition of wealth, preservation, and dispensation. Parting with it. So if you're attached to it, acquisition is a painful exercise. Preservation is a hell. Parting is super hell. Correct. You would not part with it. You will not give. Ask yourself, how many amongst you are givers here? How many amongst you have, it's not the quantum, but the heart to give. How many of you give? It's not for me to sit in judgment. You got to ask yourself, am I a giver or am I someone attached to wealth? If you're attached to wealth, you can't part with it. You can't part for your own enjoyment. It's not a question of whether you are a man who lives a life of simplicity. But you wouldn't want to part with it for your own enjoyment. If you can go and pick up a better quality slippers, you will not, because you're attached to wealth. Yes, Hariji.
You hear me, Guruji?
Now we can. I think there is some transmission issues from your end. You now, all what we got to understand is all the joys you get from the material, physical, emotional, intellectual are transient in nature. They are impermanent. You will never find yourself contented. It's not days of joy or moments of joy we're talking about, whether you are contented, because contentment and happiness one and the same. It's not. So the worldly pursuits will never make you contented. There is no end to acquisition. You want to keep acquiring, there is no end to it. You will burn your whole life acquiring every penny, every corner, every ounce of your parcel of land, every penny you want to acquire more and more, grab more and more. But there is no way you'll reach infinite. So the desire and greed for more is going to destroy you. But it is very much possible that you can hit zero. You can't hit infinite. So if you go outward, you can't hit infinite, but you go inward, you can hit zero. Means you can't satisfy all your desires. Well, that's what I'm saying. But you can nullify all your desires, and the state you reach is what they're saying, uniting oneself to Brahman. By yoga, one attains eternal bliss. Hariji, a scientific question. If you draw an arc with an infinite radius, what is the arc with an infinite radius?
It would be called a straight line.
Correct. An arc with an infinite radius is a straight line, which means?
Oh, when you talk of an arc, you're talking of a change in its direction or characteristics or whatever. And when it approaches infinity, when there is infinite change, then it is actually no change.
No change. You remain the same.
It remains constant.
So, are you all able to get the point, what we're saying?
I think, Guruji, what you were also referring to is scientifically when we say that everything is relative. I mean, I don't want to use the cliched terms of relativity and Einstein and all that, but if everything is relative, then the same thing can be different for different people. Therefore, there is nothing which is essentially constant. And the moment you identify with that which is not constant, you cannot be constant. And that is what you are subject to change, you are subject to ups and downs, and therefore that is the concept of sorrow and all the other attachments, whatever else attachments lead to. So it's because you identify with that which is not constant. And the scriptures tell us, as you have explained in the earlier verses, that the only constant is as you go inwards to the Brahman. He is the only constant, or that is the ultimate is the only constant.
Yeah.
So if you want to be stable, then the only way is to go in that direction. Any other way is going to be relative and therefore subject to change.
Absolutely. Correct. Very true. So therefore, it's rightfully to conclude your test of your spiritual development is measured by your internal condition and not your external situation. So it's not measured with an external factor. It's always measured by your internal condition, which is what is the attitude of attachment or detachment. So you will enjoy, you will live a life of bliss if you practice this attitude of detachment or renunciation. There is no other way. Hariji can be given.
Guruji, this verse and the previous verse which we studied, how do they differ it from the verses given in Sthita Prajna portion? It is more or, it is more or less the same, or is it a sort of a repetition?
It is. In fact, it is a repetition. It is being presented in a different flavor, a slightly different flavor, but the concept is very much the same, which is explained in the Sthita Prajna portion. You're right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
All right. So let's take up verse 22. Can we have verse 22, please? Thank you, sir. Ye hi samsparshaja bhogaha dukkayonaya yevate adhyantavanta kaunteya nateshu ramate buddhaha ye hi samsparshaja bhogaha dukkayonaya yevate adhyantavanta kaunteya nateshu ramate buddhaha. A very, very famous verse, beautifully captured as well. Here he says the enjoyment that are born of contacts or sense contacts are dukkha yonayaha. He calls them as wombs of pain or wombs of sorrow. For they have a beginning and an end. O Kaunteya, the wise one do not rejoice in them. Adhyantavanta. Adhyantavanta means they have a beginning and an end. Nateshu ramate buddha. Buddha is the wise man. The wise man na ramate. They don't rejoice, means they don't live a life of sense indulgences. Why do the wise don't fall a prey to sensual temptation and sense indulgences? Because he says all pleasures arriving, all enjoyments of sense contacts are wombs of sorrow. The womb We're saying womb of sorrow. Now, what do you gain? Womb of sorrow means, how do you describe it? Why does he use the word yonayaha? Yonayaha is the womb. Dukkha yonayaha. Vasantama, when you say womb na ennama, the womb of sorrow, why does he use that terminology?
It's a growth. The pain grows more and more in a enclosed environment. You feed it more and more.
So you plant it and then it metamorphoses or evolves into a
Delusion.
no, the sorrow in the beginning, it is not sorrow, Ilya. Womb na enna? It
It's
doesn't
just a
start
seed.
with seed. You plant a seed in the womb and then comes, even if you take literally, womb is the carrier of the seed planted, and then 9 months later you get the child, isn't it?
Fully
Similarly, sorry,
fully
ma?
grown.
Fully grown. Now, if you take the metaphor and take the significance, what is he saying? So, no, I'm just same concept. What you're saying is right. It starts in the womb. It starts with a seed and ends up as later on. It takes 9 months for a baby to be born. Ilya.
It multiplies. It grows more and more. The pain becomes more severe.
Pain becomes more severe. In fact, when he says wombs of sorrow, means initially it is not sorrow. That's all. It starts with pleasure. Any sense contact has an instant gratification, is immediately pleasurable, isn't it?
Yes.
But what does it end with? Sorrow. So instead of saying starts with pleasure and ends with sorrow, he replaces the word womb or the wombs of sorrow. Womb is, it takes time for it to express, grow. But it starts with pleasure, maja. Any sense indulgence is maja, pleasure. You give an ice cream to a child, maja. For ice cream, you want at any cost.
And then you end up with fever and temperature.
How many times you tell a child will not listen. Okay, never mind. You eat ice cream. You fall for that
Instant
demands of the senses. Instant pleasure.
Yes.
One lacks that self-control. The moment one lacks that self-control, one is driven by the senses, you fall a prey to the sensual pleasures, you're only creating future sorrow. There is no sorrow now, but sorrow is impending. So when does this principle of wombs of sorrow apply? Maniji. Very quiet, sir. I don't like people being very quiet, so I have to disturb you. Now, when does this concept of womb of sorrow apply? Subramanian Garu, it is not you, sir. It is AK Mani, sir, we are asking. We will take your wise input also, sir. One nimsham. Sorry, I didn't clearly spell out. AK Mani ji. No, we can't hear you. Now I think, yeah. No, still can't hear you. No, sir. Can't hear you. No. There's some audio issue, sir, from your end. Sir, I'm not able to lip read you, sir. Yeah. I'm sorry for that. Yeah, Subramaniam, sir. Unless Maniji, if you can type what you want to convey.
I don't know, Guruji. I was just thinking about that, but then it boils down to the same thing. We start with a pleasure and then it ends in pain. So what was the question, Guruji, again? We got the concept, and that's what's happening in every stage of life. We start with a small joy and all that. Ultimately, be it wealth, be it relationship and all that, the more we invest on that, we get that initial returns and all that. Finally, we find that's all very transient, and that's not the thing that's what we're looking for. So the thing is to go inward only.
Correct. In fact, you've answered it. What you're rightly saying is, my question was, this concept of womb of sorrow applies to what? What does it apply to? It applies to any objective enjoyments. Objective means when you interact with the objects and beings of the world, when you are extroverted and you go outward, the joy you derive from external contacts are subjected to this law. What he is going to say, I'm going to explain, but it is wombs of sorrow. But how do you get over that? The only way is by going inward, which you said.
But the point that you mentioned earlier, that it's very difficult to reach infinity, but very easy to reach zero. That is a beautiful point. One has to just keep that in mind. If we understand zero well, and the way Harishji also gave the beautiful, made a straight line, it registers. Thank you so much, both of you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yes. So all sense contacts start. Maniji, AK Maniji is saying start drinking for pleasure. Yes. So it starts anything, any act you get into for immediate sensual pleasure. It could be any sense pleasure. The moment you fall a prey to it, it starts. In fact, that is the trade quality of rajasic happiness or false happiness. False happiness always starts with nectar in the beginning. It becomes poison in the end. This is a trademark of false happiness. If I am having idli and if I put a spoon of butter on top of it, what will happen? I don't know whom to ask that question now. Okay, we'll ask Tinkima. If I have 10 idlis and I put a spoon of butter on each idli, what will happen?
It will taste yummy.
Oh my God. And then you add a little bit of, what do you call that? I don't know whom to ask that. What do you call that?
That powder, gunpowder or something.
Gunpowder. Yo. What sort of a description is that?
Chilies.
The paruk podi, as they call, no? You have some podi you add and then it is heavenly, yeah.
Then I'll overeat. I'll put my intellect in the box, enjoy myself, and later regret it.
So what will happen? What is nectar in the beginning becomes poison, and then the trouser is not fitting.
The worst thing about this would be that if ever I again think about an idli or see it in the movie or on the TV or anywhere passing by, I will recall the pleasure I got. And then I will say, now I must have that once again. I want to experience that joy of eating the idli. That is it. Whether it's idli, it could be anything. It doesn't have to be idli.
But usually Sunday idli comes to my mind,
Okay.
No, there are other reasons I can't mention that. But see, the point is at the point of contact, we don't perceive it. And no, we are not talking about not enjoying the senses, please. We're not talking about punishing the senses. It is not that you should deprive yourself of sense contact at all. So sense pleasure doesn't mean sense, sorry, for example, sense
Denial.
control.
Don't deny. Yeah.
Self-control or sense control is not punishing yourself or denying yourself of any contact. So it's not to be misunderstood here.
Yeah.
So it is, so when does it become a healthy sense contact? Vis-a-vis, when does it become sense indulgence?
Sense control is when I know the limitation, and indulgence is when indiscriminately I don't think of the consequences, and I just, for anything. I'm not using the intellect. It is the sense, the mind is, the pleasure.
So when the contact, I'll come back to it. I'll explain this verse next week. But rightly said, when you contact the senses driven by the mind, it is invariably sense indulgence. But the same contact, when it is established with the intellect, it is sense contact or self-control. So the difference between self-control and sense indulgence is whether you contacted with the intellect or the mind. If it is intellect, it is self-control. If it is the mind, it is sense indulgence. And it is not measured by quantum. It's not the quantum of food or quantum of sense contact or the duration of sense contact that determines indulgence. How can it be determined by the capacity? If I can have 5 idlis and somebody can have 10 idlis, you can't say he's indulging and I'm controlling self-control. No. If that contact is established by the mind, it is indulgence. But I can have 10 idlis and it have perfect control. It is sense control. But don't use that to justify and say, therefore, I've got license to eat 10 idlis. Other way, contrary is not true. Huh? Control versus it being addictive. Rajima, you have a message for us, please? Please, can you please explain? Sorry, we don't understand. There are two. Hello, Hari Om. Rajima, please. You can't say Namaskaram and escape. Annapurnama.
Guruji, I have a question. Shall I ask now?
Yeah, please.
I have a question, Guruji. Actually, something which in my notes, which I have written, I don't understand it now because I have not elaborately written. Can I ask now?
Yes, please, ma. Go ahead.
During the session in which you explained verse 13, 14, 15, I've written these 3 verses profoundly explains the concept of God. A realized person, jnani, doesn't have interest in action. I'm not understanding that now. That
13
means
to 19.
Sorry, ma.
13, 14, 15.
Okay.
Like I've written only this sentence, like a realized person, jnani, doesn't have interest in action. I have written. I have not further elaborated what you explained. So it looks a little, it doesn't make sense to me now. I can't understand it now.
Okay. It will require some time. Huh? So maybe I can, if you don't mind, I can come back to it because it's just past time. Huh? But
Okay.
however,
Like
that the
I was thinking whether he gives up the do. Sorry.
No. See, the
Whether the jnani gives up the doership.
No. In the 13, 14, 15, he is talking about a jnani here is an enlightened person. So how an enlightened person, what is his stance with reference to action? So he's describing that state. So how does that operate with reference to the physical body? How does the Atman function with reference to the body? And then he says the Lord neither creates doership nor actions. He uses the three words Dehi in the body, then Prabhu means the Lord, and then he says Vibhuhu means the omnipresent reality. So he talks the same truth from with reference to the individual and how he becomes the Lord and how he becomes the reality, the all-pervading reality. Perhaps I'll come back to it and explain to you all. Okay, ma? I'll clarify it again.
Maybe I can listen to the recorded version also once again and try to get
please, if you are able to get hold of it, nothing like it. Sure, but always
yes.
Welcome
Thank
to
you,
ask. Okay, right, ma. Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Hari Om. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.